When a battering ram strikes a wall, the wall falls inward. When siege towers push against fortifications, debris scatters inside the city. When sappers dig tunnels beneath foundations, towers collapse onto the defenders. That's basic physics. Every military engineer in ancient history understood this. Force applied from outside pushes material inside. So why did the walls of Jericho fall outward? 3,400 years ago, something happened at this fortress city that defied the laws of siege warfare. Archaeologists, even skeptical ones, found tons of red mud brick piled at the base of the outer wall. Not inside the city where attackers would push it, outside, at the bottom. The walls didn't just fall, they fell in the wrong direction. How? And more importantly, why? The year is approximately 1400 BC. You're standing on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, somewhere in the lowest inhabited valley on Earth, 250 meters below sea level. The air is thick, the heat is oppressive, and rising from the valley floor before you sits a fortress that has guarded this pass for over 1,000 years. This is Jericho, the gateway to Canaan. For the Israelites who had wandered 40 years in the wilderness, this city represented everything that stood between them and the Promised Land. Control Jericho, and you control the eastern approach to Canaan. Fail here, and the conquest ends before it begins. But look at what they faced. Stone foundations rising from the earth, mud brick towers looming above, walls so impossibly high that the spies who first saw them reported feeling like grasshoppers. This wasn't a village with a fence. This was Bronze Age military engineering at its finest, a fortress designed to break armies. And they had no siege equipment, no battering rams, no scaling towers, just bronze weapons, faith, and a strange set of instructions involving priests, trumpets, and walking in circles. What happened next would leave physical evidence that archaeologists are still arguing about today. Since 1907, teams of excavators have dug through the ruins of Jericho. German archaeologists Selin and Watzinger, British excavator John Garstang, the legendary Kathleen Kenyon, and more recently, Bryant Wood and Lorenzo Nigro. They've disagreed about almost everything, especially the date, but they all documented the same strange fact. The walls fell outward. To understand why that matters, we need to understand how those walls were built. Because Jericho wasn't protected by a single wall, it was protected by a system. 4 layers of defense stacked on top of each other, designed to make this city unconquerable. And hidden within that system was a weakness that even the builders didn't fully understand. A weakness that would matter very much to a woman named Rahab. Imagine you're an Israelite scout sent ahead to assess the defenses. You approach from the east across the Jordan Plain. Here's what you see. Layer 1, the stone revetment. At ground level, massive stones, not neat blocks, rough-cut boulders, some weighing hundreds of pounds, fitted together in what archaeologists call cyclopean masonry. This stone wall rises 4 to 5 meters straight up. That's 12 to 15 feet of solid rock before you even reach the first brick. But this isn't the main wall. This is just the foundation, a retaining structure built to hold back the artificial mound the city sits on, and to create an unclimbable vertical surface. Smooth, sheer, nowhere to grip. Layer 2, the lower mud brick wall. On top of the stone revetment sits the first true defensive wall. Mud brick. 2 meters thick, that's over 6 feet of solid clay brick. And it rises another 6 to 8 meters above the stone. That's 20 to 26 feet of mud brick stacked on top of 15 feet of stone. You're now looking at a barrier nearly 40 feet high. and you haven't reached the top yet. Layer 3. The glacis. Behind this outer mud brick wall, the ground slopes upward. This is the glacis, an earthen rampart angled at about 35 degrees, its surface plastered smooth. Even if you somehow scaled the outer wall, you'd face a slick ramp designed to send you sliding back down, while defenders above rained arrows and stones on your head. Layer 4. The upper city wall. At the crest of this slope, another mud brick wall surrounds the upper city, the administrative center, the temples, the homes of the elite. This inner wall adds another 3 to 4 meters of defense. Total height from ground level to the top of the inner wall? Approximately 14 meters, 46 feet. A 4-story building made of stone, brick, and packed earth. No doors on the outside, no handholds, just vertical death. Feel the weight of those stones. Hear the scrape of brick against brick as workers, generation after generation, built this fortress higher and stronger. Breathe in the dust of a construction project that took centuries to complete. This wasn't primitive. This was military architecture refined through 1,000 years of Canaanite warfare. And the Israelites were supposed to take it with trumpets. But every fortress has a weakness, and Jericho's was hiding in plain sight. Jericho had a population problem. The upper city, the area protected by the innermost wall, was small, maybe 6 acres. That's enough for the king's palace, the temples, the administrative buildings, and homes for the wealthy. But where did everyone else live? The answer? They built houses in the only space available, the gap between the walls. When German archaeologists first excavated Jericho in 1907, they found something unexpected. On the sloped rampart between the lower and upper walls, pressed against the inner face of the outer mud brick wall, were the foundations of houses, ordinary homes. People had literally built their dwellings into the fortification system. This is where the poor lived, the marginalized, the outsiders. This is where Rahab lived. Joshua chapter 2, verse 15 contains a detail that sounds like a throwaway line, but is actually architecturally precise. The Hebrew text says Rahab's house was Bekir HaHoma, in the wall of the fortification. Not near it, in it. Her home used the outer defensive wall as its back wall, with her window facing outward toward the countryside. That's how she lowered the Israelite spies with a rope. Her window opened to the outside, because her house was built into the outer shell of the city's defenses. Now here's what the German archaeologists found that nobody expected. When they traced the circuit of collapsed walls around the city, they documented total destruction. Mud brick rubble everywhere. The walls had fallen and burned. The city was annihilated. Except in one place. On the northern side of the tell, a short section of the lower mud brick wall was still standing, still intact, still upright, with houses still attached to its inner face. Over 2 meters of mud brick, 8 feet, preserved in place while everything else had collapsed. One section, on the north, with houses built into it, still standing. The Bible says Rahab's family survived. The Bible says her house was spared. The archaeology shows exactly one section of wall that didn't fall. Coincidence or confirmation? But let's get back to the central mystery. Most of the wall did fall. So how? And why outward? First, let's establish what normal looks like. When ancient armies attacked walls, they used battering rams, siege towers, and sapping tunnels. All of these apply force from the outside. Physics dictates that when you push something from one side, it falls toward the other side. Walls attacked from outside fall inward. The debris lands inside the city. This is true of virtually every conquered city in the ancient Near East. Archaeologists expect to find wall rubble inside defensive perimeters. At Jericho, they found the opposite. John Garstang, excavating in the 1930s, documented massive deposits of red mud brick at the base of the stone revetment wall, outside the city, not inside. Kathleen Kenyon, excavating in the 1950s with more modern techniques, found the same thing. In her own words, she described red bricks fallen down, piling nearly to the top of the revetment. Her conclusion? These must have come from the wall on top of the bank. The mud brick wall that once stood on top of the stone foundation had collapsed forward and slid down, coming to rest in a massive pile at the base of the retaining wall. It fell outward. The Hebrew text of Joshua 6:20 uses a phrase that most English translations render as fell down flat. But the Hebrew is more specific. The word is tachteha, literally beneath itself. The wall fell into its own footprint. It collapsed at its foundation and slid forward, not pushed inward by attackers, pulled outward by gravity. What could cause that? The most plausible physical mechanism is an earthquake. Jericho sits directly on the Jordan Rift Valley, one of the most seismically active fault lines on the planet. Earthquakes here are not rare, they're inevitable. Here's what seismic engineers propose. A significant earthquake strikes. The stone revetment, anchored deep in bedrock, holds firm. But the heavy mud brick wall on top, rigid and brittle, loses its bond with the foundation. The shaking separates brick from stone, and gravity does the rest. The wall slides forward, outward, down the slope, exactly as the archaeology shows. And here's the tactical result. Instead of a 46-foot vertical barrier, the Israelites now faced a pile of debris leaning against the stone foundation. The walls didn't disappear. They transformed from obstacle to ramp. Joshua 6:20 says the people went up into the city, not through, not around, up. They climbed the very walls that had fallen to keep them out. The walls fell outward. Debris formed a ramp. One section survived in the north, but the evidence doesn't stop at the walls. What archaeologists found inside the burned city provides another startling confirmation. Both Garstang and Kenyon documented a destruction layer of extraordinary intensity. Ash up to 1 meter thick, 3 feet of charred debris. Walls blackened by fire, timbers burned to charcoal. Kenyon wrote that the destruction was complete, and that every room was filled with fallen bricks, timbers, and household utensils. The city didn't just fall, it burned completely. Joshua 6:24 says they burned the whole city and everything in it. The archaeology confirms total incineration. But here's the detail that shocked excavators. Mixed into the destruction layer, in house after house, they found ceramic storage jars, large vessels designed to hold grain. And these jars were full. Wheat and barley, carbonized by the flames, but still filling the containers. Burned in place, never emptied. In the ancient Near East, grain was everything. It was food, it was currency, it was survival. When armies conquered cities, grain was the first thing looted. Soldiers needed to eat, supply lines needed filling. You don't leave grain behind. But at Jericho, jar after jar sat full and burned. Why would any army leave food to burn? Because they were ordered to. Joshua 6:17-19 records a specific command. Everything in the city was herem, devoted to destruction, dedicated to the Lord. No plunder, no spoils, Gold and silver went to the tabernacle treasury, but everything else was to be destroyed. Not taken, not used, burned. The full grain jars are physical evidence that the conquerors obeyed. They walked past wealth measured in survival and set it on fire, just as the text says. There's another implication. Full jars mean the harvest had just been gathered. That's spring, late March or April. Joshua 3:15 says Israel crossed the Jordan at harvest time, when the river was flooding. Joshua 5:10 says they celebrated Passover and ate the produce of the land. The grain jars confirm the season. The text and the archaeology align. Walls that fell outward, debris that formed a ramp, a surviving northern section, grain burned instead of looted. Every detail matches the biblical account. But one question sparked a 40-year war among archaeologists. When did this happen? In the 1950s, Kathleen Kenyon dropped a bombshell. Using her stratigraphic analysis, she concluded that Jericho's destruction occurred around 1550 BC, 150 years before Joshua would have arrived according to biblical chronology. The city, she argued, was abandoned and uninhabited during the Late Bronze Age. When Joshua showed up, there was nothing there to conquer. Her evidence? The absence of a particular type of imported pottery called Cypriot bichrome ware. This distinctive decorated ceramic is a marker for Late Bronze Age occupation throughout Canaan. Kenyon didn't find it at Jericho. Therefore, she concluded, the city wasn't occupied during that period. For 40 years, her dating dominated academic consensus. Jericho became Exhibit A for biblical skeptics. The story was myth. The walls were legend. Case closed. Then, in 1990, an archaeologist named Bryant Wood took another look. Wood was a specialist in Canaanite pottery. He went back through Garstang's excavation records from the 1930s, and he found something Kenyon had missed, or dismissed. Garstang had found Cypriot bichrome pottery. It was in his records. It was in his photographs. The very ceramic type Kenyon said was absent had been excavated decades before she arrived. Even more damaging, Wood discovered that Kenyon herself had found similar pottery, but misclassified it. Her excavation focused on a poor residential area, exactly the neighborhood where people couldn't afford expensive imports. The absence in her trenches didn't mean absence in the city. It meant she was digging in the wrong place. But pottery wasn't Wood's only evidence. At Jericho's cemetery, archaeologists had found Egyptian scarabs, those carved beetle amulets inscribed with royal names. Scarabs function like coins with dates. At Jericho, the sequence runs continuously through pharaoh after pharaoh, from the 18th century BC down to Amenhotep III, who reigned until about 1350 BC. Then the sequence stops. No later scarabs. No evidence of occupation after that point. Why would the sequence end unless the city was destroyed? And then there's the carbon-14 test. A charcoal sample from the destruction layer was sent to the British Museum laboratory. The result? 1410 BC, plus or minus 40 years. Not 1550 BC as Kenyon claimed. 1410 BC, right when the Bible places the conquest. 3 independent lines of evidence. Pottery typology pointing to Late Bronze I, Egyptian scarabs ending with Amenhotep III, carbon-14 dating to 1410 BC, all converging on the same time frame. Recent Italian excavations under Lorenzo Nigro have added more. Even Nigro, who doesn't fully accept Wood's conclusions, has found late Bronze Age structures at the site, including what appears to be an administrative building. The city was occupied. Kenyon's abandonment theory is dead. The scholarly debate continues over precise dates. That's how archaeology works. But the claim that Jericho didn't exist when Joshua arrived? That claim has collapsed, like the walls themselves. For over a century, scholars dismissed Jericho as myth. The walls were legendary, the collapse was impossible, the timing was wrong. The great Kathleen Kenyon had pronounced the verdict. The city was abandoned before Joshua arrived. The Bible was historically unreliable. Case closed. And then the evidence started speaking. Walls that fell outward, not from battering rams pushing inward, but from foundation failure pulling them down the slope. The exact physics you'd expect from an earthquake, not a siege. Debris that formed a ramp, transforming an impassable barrier into a climbable slope, exactly as the Hebrew text describes when it says the people went up into the city. A northern section that survived, with houses built into it. One small stretch of wall still standing while everything else collapsed. Right where Rahab's house should have been. Grain jars full and burned, not looted by hungry soldiers, but destroyed in place. Proof of rapid conquest and religious obedience to the harem command. Evidence that the attackers followed orders even when it cost them. And a date, confirmed 3 different ways, that matches the biblical account within decades. This wasn't mythology. This was forensic evidence. The walls of Jericho didn't fall because trumpet vibrations shattered stone. Sound doesn't work that way. They didn't fall because of mass psychological projection. That's not how physics operates. They fell because something shifted in the earth beneath them. The Jordan Rift Valley produces earthquakes regularly. The geology makes it inevitable. The mechanism was natural. But the timing? At the exact moment when Israel completed their 7th circuit on the 7th day, when the priests blew the trumpets and the people raised their voices, the ground shook. The foundations failed. The walls slid outward, and a path opened up. The mechanism was natural. The timing was supernatural. Joshua 6:20 says the wall fell tachteha, beneath itself. The archaeology shows exactly that. The text says the people went up. The debris ramp explains how. The text says Rahab's section survived. The northern wall confirms it. The text says everything was burned, not plundered. The grain jars testify. What had been hidden for 3,400 years is now clear. The Bible wasn't writing mythology, it was writing history, and the ground itself still testifies. The walls of Jericho were not just stone and mud, they were a statement. Canaan is impregnable. The gods of this land are stronger than your God. No army of former slaves can break what we have built. The Lord's answer wasn't a bigger army. It wasn't better weapons. It wasn't superior siege technology. It was perfect timing and impossible physics. 7 days of walking, 7 priests with trumpets, and on the 7th day, the earth moved. Every barrier has a foundation, and every foundation can be shaken. What evidence from Jericho surprised you most? The outward collapse? The surviving northern section? The grain jars that weren't looted? Let me know in the comments.